In a small town where the noon sun made the roofs shimmer like bowls of brass, an ordinary person, someone you might pass on any sidewalk, paused outside a quiet temple garden. They had worked steadily for years, always on time, rarely extravagant, yet their life felt stuck in place, like a cart with one wheel sunk in mud, drawn by the sound of a bamboo fountain. They stepped through the open gate and found an old teacher seated beneath a Bodhi tree, cradling a simple cup of tea. The teacher's face was weathered the way river stones are softened by time, not broken by it. The visitor bowed, apologized for intruding, and, after a still moment where only sparrows spoke, shared the ache that had grown heavy in their chest. I work hard, but I don't move forward. How does someone like me ever become truly free? The teacher nodded gently, as if hearing a familiar melody. There are 5 lessons about wealth, the elder said, not often taught in school. Learn them with patience, and you will walk lighter. The first lesson arrived like clear water. Spend less than you earn. It is not a punishment, the teacher said, but a doorway. If your earnings are a stream, your spending is the channel too wide, and the stream disappears into sand. Narrow the channel, and the stream becomes a river. The visitor remembered paydays that briefly felt like rescue boats, only to drift away on little leaks. A new gadget, a dinner out, a loan to cover last month's shortfall. The teacher spoke in numbers, but also in compassion. Set aside a portion each month before you do anything else. Simplicity is not deprivation, it is room to breathe. The old story of wealth, work, hope, repeat reshaped into something steadier, a practice. As with meditation, the point is not to force the mind silent, but to notice where it strays and gently return. Budgets, then, are not shackles, they are the bell that calls you back. Adapted from the original lesson, on spending less than you earn. The second lesson was a net spread beneath the tightrope. Build an emergency fund. Life will tilt, the teacher said. Roofs leak, jobs end, engines sigh. Savings are not a fortress against pain. They are a cushion that keeps fear from bruising the soul. The visitor pictured 3 small bowls, one for daily rice, one for future seeds, and one for storms. The storm bowl, the teacher explained, should grow quietly in the background 3 months, then 6, so that when sickness or surprise arrives, you meet it with steadiness, not panic. The visitor felt a subtle release, the way shoulders drop after carrying a bag too long. In the temple garden, a breeze moved the leaves just enough to make shade dance. The world did not promise safety, but it offered rhythm, and the fund was a beat the heart could trust. Adapted from the original lesson on emergency funds, here the elder's voice softened, and the teaching turned inward. When the mind is frantic, they said, money becomes a mirror that multiplies fear. When the mind is anchored, money becomes a tool that extends kindness. The visitor thought of a parent they barely called, a neighbor whose light bulb flickered in the stairwell, the way generosity felt impossible when every surprise threatened collapse. Stability is a form of compassion, the teacher added. Care for yourself so you can care for others. The visitor did not weep, but something unclenched. They imagined a different month, one where saving first was as natural as bowing on entry, one where emergencies were not cliffs, just sharp turns taken slowly, one where dignity was not postponed until some future raise, but practiced now, with each deliberate choice. The bamboo fountain tipped, emptied, and filled again. In that simple rhythm, the visitor heard the outline of a life. The third lesson arrived as the temple bell rang once, a low sound rolling through the air like distant thunder. Invest in yourself. The elder leaned closer, his eyes glinting as though he were speaking of treasure buried not in earth but in the heart. Most people chase coins outside, he said, but the richest minds lie within your own hands. Sharpen them. He spoke of carpenters who bought finer tools and found not just better woodwork but also new dignity, of farmers who studied soil and rain until their harvests doubled without expanding a single field. Your mind is the forge, the elder whispered. Each book you read, each skill you polish, each practice you repeat, is another strike of the hammer. Wealth built on your own craft is harder to steal than gold hidden under a pillow. The visitor thought of evenings wasted in idle complaint, of mornings where habit dulled into routine. They imagined instead spending that same time reading about the trade, attending a course, learning how others had walked paths of growth. The elder continued gently, "The world will always tempt you to spend on things that vanish, clothes that fade, devices that rust. But money spent to enlarge your capacity is not spending, it is planting. A tree grows from a small seed, so too will your earnings grow when watered with knowledge." The visitor felt both humbled and stirred, like someone who realizes the soil of their own garden had been fertile all along. Adapted from the original lesson on self-investment. As twilight deepened, the fourth lesson emerged with the sound of cicadas rising in chorus. Earn more by creating value. Once your skills ripen, the teacher said, let them bear fruit. Do not only work by the clock, let your worth be measured by what you bring forth. He told of bakers who began selling loaves beyond the village, of tailors who stitched not just clothes but reputations, of laborers who, by mastering their craft, found themselves courted by many. Income expands not because time stretches longer, but because skill multiplies impact. The visitor nodded slowly, picturing themselves no longer bound to a single wage but stepping into the vast field of possibility. It was as though a door had opened in the wall they had leaned against for years, revealing a road leading outward, adapted from the original lesson on earning more. The elder's words, however, were not a mere formula for ambition. They carried a deeper current. The more you grow, the more the world entrusts to you, he said. But, remember, growth without wisdom becomes hunger without end. Work not only to fill your bowl but to have rice to share. The true measure of wealth is not how heavy your purse is, but how light your heart feels when you give. The visitor bowed their head. The garden was quiet except for the fountain's steady rhythm, and for the first time in years, silence felt generous rather than empty. They sensed that wealth was not just freedom from debt, nor abundance of coin, but also the capacity to meet life with open hands. Hands that could hold tools, give help, and shape meaning. The final teaching came as the moon lifted pale and round above the garden wall. Create streams of passive income. The elder traced a circle in the dust with his fingertip, then drew smaller lines branching outward, like rivers feeding from a lake. When you have walked the first 4 steps, he said, you will find your purse no longer empty but slowly filling. Do not let those coins sleep. Set them to work, gently, wisely. Money, like a servant, can carry water long after your hands grow tired. He spoke of modest beginnings, renting a spare room, planting an orchard whose fruit would sell each season, joining others to share in a small trade. Even a small stream, if steady, can keep the fields green. The visitor listened as if to a secret meant only for them, realizing that the point was not sudden riches but lasting rhythm, adapted from the original lesson on passive income. The elder paused, letting the night settle. But remember, he added softly, streams of money without streams of meaning can still leave a soul thirsty. Build wealth, yes, but let it serve peace. When your needs are met and your fears grow quiet, use what flows beyond that to lift others. A lamp lights not only its own base, but the path of many. The visitor thought of their aging parents, of neighbors who sometimes skipped meals, of a younger cousin dreaming of school. For the first time, the idea of having more felt less like a scramble and more like a chance to widen the circle of warmth. As they rose to leave, the visitor bowed deeply, gratitude pressing against their ribs. They had entered the garden with the weight of failure, but now carried 5 seeds. Live below means, guard against storms, invest in the self, create value, and let money flow on its own. Each seed was simple, but together they promised a forest. The elder only smiled, lifting the cup of tea as if toasting the night itself. Go, he said, walk gently, but walk forward. The bamboo fountain tipped again, water falling into its stone basin with a hollow sound. The visitor stepped out of the temple gate, not yet rich, not yet transformed, but carrying a rhythm in their chest that matched the fountain's beat. steady, enduring, alive. Somewhere within that rhythm, wealth had already begun.